Welcome, weary traveler of the vast blue seas of imagination, to this soft and endless night, where the waves whisper stories older than dreams themselves, where ships drift beneath a sky filled with forgotten constellations, and where we, together, will set sail through the boundless world of One Piece, gently exploring the lore, the myths, and the dreams that shaped an era of freedom and longing. So find a quiet place to rest, perhaps with the faint hum of the ocean in your thoughts, and allow your mind to drift like a ship beneath the stars, as I tell you of the boy with the straw hat who dared to dream, of the king who laughed at death, and of a world that came alive in the wake of a single sentence, a single spark that ignited humanity's greatest voyage. So close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the sea carry you away. It began, as all great tides do, with a silence broken by laughter, the kind of laughter that feels like defiance itself, echoing through a crowd heavy with fear and awe. For when Goldie, Roger, the Pirate King, stood upon the platform that would mark his end, the world held its breath, the sky dimmed, and the wind carried his words farther than any ship could ever sail, creating not just an age but a legend, making his death the birth of something far greater than life, showing that even an ending could become a beginning if one had the courage to smile into the face of destiny. He spoke of treasure, of the One Piece, of all he had gathered hidden in one place at the end of the Grand Line, and in that moment the spark leapt from his heart into the hearts of countless dreamers scattered across the four seas, transforming despair into purpose, monotony into myth, and the calm waters of the world into restless waves filled with ships carrying those who sought not gold but meaning, those who heard the echo of his laughter and mistook it for the sound of freedom calling their name. The seas themselves seemed to awaken, each one a chapter of humanity's longing East Blue, where dreams are born in quiet harbors and small villages, where the sea is gentle but the hearts are restless. West Blue, filled with scholars and shadows of forgotten truths. North Blue, proud and scarred by endless wars. And South Blue, where the sun burns but hope never fades. All four seas fed into the Grand Line, the river of destiny that cuts through the center of the world like a scar and a promise, both guarded by storms, monsters, and mysteries that defy reason, showing that the path to dreams must always be lined with danger, reminding us that the greatest treasures are never found without struggle. In that age of awakening, the seas filled with ships, some small and fragile, others vast and cruel, their sails catching not only wind but longing, and amidst them all were those whose stories would become the quiet songs sung by the ocean itself. There were pirates who dreamed of kingdoms and pirates who dreamed of freedom. There were Marines who believed in justice and Marines who only knew obedience. And there were the silent masses caught between them, wondering if perhaps both sides were lost to the same sea of contradictions, making the world of One Piece a mirror held against our own, showing the eternal tension between control and chaos, between peace and the yearning for more. And somewhere within that endless tide was a small village called Fuchsia, nothing remarkable, nothing grand, only a speck upon the map and yet destined to become the cradle of legend, for there a boy named Monkey D. Luffy gazed at the horizon with eyes too wide for the world, dreaming of sailing beyond it, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to live freely, to find the One Piece and become the Pirate King, a dream not of power but of liberation, not of ruling others but of reaching the end of the sea and smiling when he got there. He was not born into greatness, nor blessed with divine strength, only a boy whose heart was too light to sink, who laughed louder than reason allowed, who ate a strange fruit that made his body rubber, but his spirit unbreakable, showing that destiny, once tasted, can stretch across lifetimes without snapping, demonstrating that sometimes the greatest gift is not strength but resilience, the ability to bend without breaking, to fall and bounce back higher than before, to turn defeat into laughter and laughter into resolve. As the great pirate era spread, the world itself began to change, the old powers trembling beneath the weight of dreams. The world government clung to order, declaring that pirates were nothing but criminals, yet every banner they raised only made the people wonder why justice needed so much fire to survive. The Marines sailed under that banner, their sense of duty pulling them toward the same sea that gave birth to rebellion, creating a balance made of contradiction, a dance of chaos and order that could never end, because both sides were made of men and women chasing their own sense of righteousness, showing that justice and evil are often separated by nothing more than who tells the story. And in this world of clashing dreams and opposing tides, the Pirate King's final words continued to echo, drifting like a lullaby through the generations, reminding all who listened that the sea belongs to no one and to everyone, that freedom is the truest treasure, and that every man and woman who sails, no matter their flag, is seeking something only the ocean can answer. Even the islands seemed to remember him, the strange islands of the Grand Line, where the weather itself bends to will and whim, where climates change like moods, where whales sing to the stars, and where compasses spin, as though confused by human hope, all of it alive, restless, and vast, making the Grand Line not a sea but a living creature, breathing and dreaming with those who dared to cross it, showing that nature itself conspires with the bold. And so, as years passed and the stories multiplied, one truth remained constant. The dream that began with laughter never ended, for every new pirate, every new ship, carried a fragment of that moment, of that promise, made upon the gallows, proving that dreams are contagious, and that no amount of order can silence a single honest wish shouted to the wind. The boy with the straw hat was born not into a world of grandeur, but into a village small enough for the sea breeze to be the loudest sound, a place where time seemed to sway like the ships that passed too far to reach. And in that village there lived a child who did not fear the horizon, who saw in the endless blue something waiting for him, something that whispered through the salt air, promising a freedom no one could name, and that boy was Monkey D. Luffy, whose dream was so simple that it became impossible, for he wished to become the Pirate King, not because he wanted to rule the seas, but because he wanted to be the freest man upon them, making his dream an act of defiance against everything that sought to bind the human spirit, showing that the greatest crowns are those forged by laughter rather than gold. He met a man once who changed everything, a red-haired pirate named Shanks, who carried an air of calm danger, the kind that comes not from arrogance but from peace within oneself. And Shanks would sit in the small tavern with his crew, telling stories of seas that roared like living beasts and islands where giants walked among clouds, creating a world of dreams for a child too young to understand that some dreams come with wounds. Luffy admired him not for his power but for his freedom, for the way he laughed when insulted, for the way he refused to draw his sword over pride, showing a kind of strength that words cannot define, a strength that belongs to those who know who they are. And then there was the day of the mountain bandits, the day when cruelty came into that quiet village, when men mocked the pirates and spilled their drinks and shattered the peace, and Shanks only smiled and let them, until the moment came when Luffy, small and furious, tried to defend his hero, only to be thrown aside, his words unheard, his courage unnoticed by those who saw only weakness. But Shanks saw it. He always did. And when the bandits dragged the boy to sea, when the waves rose and the monsters stirred, it was Shanks who dove in, unarmed, fearless, and when the sea took his arm, it gave him something greater in return, a legend that would live forever in the heart of a child who understood, for the first time, that dreams have a price and that true strength is not measured by the harm you cause, but by the things you are willing to lose to protect someone else. When Shanks placed his straw hat upon Luffy's head, it was not merely a gesture but a coronation, a silent promise passed from one generation of dreamers to another, saying, "This hat is a burden, and a hope, and a legacy. Carry it until the day you return it to me, as a man who has seen the world and smiled at its pain." And Luffy, with tears mixed with salt and sunlight, promised he would. From that moment, the boy and the sea were bound together, his heart tied to the endless horizon, his laughter echoing across waters that would soon remember his name. Years passed, and the boy became a young man with a scar beneath his eye and a smile that could calm storms. And when he finally set sail, his boat was no grand vessel, just a small dinghy, barely able to hold his dream. But the ocean welcomed him nonetheless, for the sea in one piece does not measure worth by size or power, but by spirit, making even the smallest ship a kingdom if the one who steers it believes enough. The winds carried him toward the unknown, toward adventure, and in his path awaited the companions who would become his family, each drawn not by duty or fate, but by resonance, by something within Luffy that reminded them of what they had forgotten. Hope. Zoro came first, a man of scars and silence, who carried the weight of every battle lost and won in the name of a promise made to a girl long gone, showing that even the strongest swordsman needs a dream to cut through the darkness. He joined Luffy not because of gold or glory, but because he saw, in that foolish grin, a reflection of something pure, a truth that no law or title could define. Nami followed, her heart divided between love and survival, a thief born of tragedy who sought to buy back her village with stolen maps, showing that freedom sometimes begins in desperation. Usopp, the liar, the dreamer, the storyteller who spoke of bravery before he ever found it, brought laughter into sorrow, proving that the stories we tell ourselves can one day become real if we keep speaking them long enough. And Sanji, the cook of the sea, whose hands fed friends and foes alike, carried a promise to a man who saved him from starvation, demonstrating that kindness, too, can be a weapon, and that even hunger can become holy if endured with love. Together they became more than a crew. They became an answer to the world's cruelty, a living contradiction that showed that pirates could be kind, that friendship could be law, that a ship could be a home if the hearts aboard it beat in unison. The Going Merry, their first vessel, became a companion itself, a living memory built of wood and laughter, carrying them across tempests and tears, showing that even things without hearts can learn to love if they are loved enough. And in every battle, every island, every tear shed across the deck, Luffy's dream shone unbroken, not because it was easy, but because he never doubted, never wavered, even when defeat seemed certain, making his spirit into a current that pulled others along, showing that belief, when shared, becomes something greater than power. It becomes destiny itself. He fought for his friends not because they were strong, but because they were his, and that alone made him unstoppable. A storm made of laughter, a force made of faith. Through him, the sea began to remember what it once was, not a battlefield, but a canvas upon which humanity painted its longing, and each island they reached became a verse in that long song of freedom that began the day Roger smiled at death. In every fight, in every feast, in every farewell, the same truth lingered that to chase a dream is to defy the world, and to love your crew is to understand that no treasure, not even the one piece, can surpass the warmth of those who sail beside you. And as the stars began to tilt over that first stretch of their journey, when the Grand Line still shimmered ahead like a mirage, and the sea was both endless and inviting, Luffy's laughter rose again, carrying across the wind like a promise, making the night feel infinite, showing that no matter how vast the ocean, the dream that drives it will always be louder than the waves. The crew grew as dreams converged like currents beneath the moonlight, the soft rhythm of waves against wood creating the music of companionship. And from the moment the Going Merry began to carry more than one man's dream, it became a living tapestry of shared purpose, making their voyage less about reaching an end and more about discovering the world and themselves within it, showing that the true treasure of the sea is not gold but connection, not victory but understanding, for the seas of One Piece are wide enough to contain every kind of heart. Zoro sat at the ship's bow often, his swords resting quietly beside him, his eyes fixed on the horizon that never drew closer, making him appear both calm and restless, the duality of a warrior who sought perfection not for glory, but for the fulfillment of a promise, a vow made beneath a fading sky to a girl named Kuina, whose spirit lingered in every swing of his blade, showing that loss can become fuel, and memory, when carried long enough, can turn into strength. In Zoro's silence lived a strange gentleness, the kind found in men who understand that control is the truest power, that discipline is not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. And as he fought for Luffy and for himself, he began to embody the philosophy that one's dream is only as sharp as one's will, proving that loyalty and ambition can coexist without devouring one another. Nami, by contrast, was the storm that followed calm seas, her laughter bright but guarded, her eyes always scanning the horizon for danger and profit alike, for she had lived too long under the shadow of Arlong's tyranny, drawing maps not for exploration but for liberation, mapping not the sea but her own path toward freedom. And through her Luffy learned that even those who smile often do so to hide their pain, making her arc a quiet hymn to endurance, showing that those who have suffered most often become the anchors that hold others steady. Her dream to draw a complete map of the world was not born of greed but of curiosity, a yearning to understand the ocean that had both caged and freed her. And through her hands the story gained direction, her maps becoming symbols of the human need to define what we love, to name the unknown even as it refuses to be contained. Usopp brought words to the wind, weaving lies so tender they became truths, spinning tales of bravery that one day caught up to his reality, and in every exaggerated story there was a kernel of hope, a child's defiance against insignificance, showing that imagination is not deception but creation, and that the act of believing in one's own fiction can make it real. He feared death and doubt. He ran when courage failed him, but he always returned, trembling but unbroken, proving that bravery is not born from the absence of fear, but from walking with it, hand in hand, through the fire of every impossible moment. In the quiet nights aboard the ship, when the stars mirrored the lamps of distant ships, Usopp would tell stories to no one and everyone, and the sea would listen, carrying his voice across unseen miles, perhaps to some lonely island where another dreamer waited to be inspired. And then there was Sanji, whose elegance and fire intertwined like wine and flame, the chef who fed the sea itself, who turned hunger into art and compassion into rebellion, for he had known starvation, had faced the agony of survival on a floating rock, his only companion a man who cut off his own leg to save him, teaching him that sacrifice is the purest form of love. From that pain came generosity, from that despair came grace. And so Sanji cooked not merely to fill stomachs but to restore faith, making his kitchen a sanctuary where laughter could drown out the memory of hunger. His dream of finding the all-blue, a sea where all the world's fish come together, was a metaphor for unity, for the blending of all divisions into one ocean of peace, showing that food, like kindness, transcends all flags and nations. Together they sailed into the grand line, the sea of madness and miracles, their hearts bound by an unspoken understanding that they were no longer running toward something but becoming something, each day on the going merry, polishing their dreams like pebbles smoothed by tide and time, and though danger stalked them at every turn, they met it with laughter, for laughter, to them, was armor, and friendship was shield enough. The islands they visited became mirrors of the human soul, each one revealing a truth about fear, about greed, about love. And through each encounter the Straw Hats grew not in power but in clarity, seeing more of what the world was and what it could be. When they fought Arlong and freed Nami's village, the battle was not just of fists and blades but of chains and memories, breaking the invisible bonds that bind hearts long before physical ones are shattered. And as Luffy placed the straw hat upon Nami's head and told her to believe in him, the world seemed to stop for a moment, the waves themselves holding their breath, showing that trust, once given, can become the strongest weapon of all. It was in that moment that the crew truly became one, not through victory but through vulnerability, through the silent understanding that none of them would ever again face their demons alone. And so they continued onward, the ship cutting through clouds and current alike, each member carrying the weight of their own pasts while lightening the burdens of others, making their voyage a moving constellation of dreams. In the nights that followed, when the ocean turned black and the stars blinked like the eyes of gods, Luffy would stand at the bow, his hat tilted back, smiling toward a horizon no one else could yet see, and his laughter would drift softly through the dark, weaving through the creak of wood and the sigh of sails, reminding his friends that tomorrow was another island, another chance, another step closer to that unseen treasure that was beginning to feel less like gold and more like destiny. For in the world of One Piece, the gathering of dreamers is itself the grandest act of rebellion, a declaration whispered against the thunder of fate that says no one dream is enough alone, that freedom is not a solitary journey but a shared voyage. And as the going merry sailed ever farther from the world's certainty into the chaos of its heart, it carried within it something divine, the unshakable belief that every dream, no matter how small, can change the shape of the sea. The sea ahead shimmered with an almost sentient stillness, as though it knew the moment had come for the ship of dreamers to leave the known world behind. And as the going merry drifted toward Reverse Mountain, that impossible gateway where four seas met in defiance of all natural law, the crew could feel their hearts rise with the current, drawn upward by destiny itself, the ship climbing through walls of water that roared like ancient beasts, making their ascent feel less like travel and more like rebirth, showing that entry into the Grand Line is not a crossing of distance, but a passage of spirit, a transformation where the ocean tests whether your resolve is heavier than fear. The climb was madness and wonder intertwined, the merry tossed and swallowed by the mountain's streaming veins of sea, and for a moment it seemed the crew might vanish into the torrent, but laughter, the unbreakable rhythm of Luffy's faith, filled the air and kept them afloat, proving once again that in the world of One Piece, belief is buoyancy, and joy is the truest compass. When they shot from the mountain's peak into the Grand Line below, It was as though the heavens had exhaled them into a new reality, one where islands defied reason, where climates shifted like moods, where the laws of man and nature melted into myth. The Grand Line was not simply an ocean, it was a living consciousness that responded to the will of those who sailed it, creating storms for the doubtful and calm for the resolute. And within its shifting moods, the Straw Hats found the truest mirror of themselves. The log pose, the strange compass that pointed not north, but toward the next island's magnetic heart, became their guide and metaphor alike, reminding them that progress is rarely a straight line, that to move forward sometimes means to follow the invisible pull of faith through confusion, making navigation not a science but a dialogue between dreamer and sea. The first islands they reached were strange and unpredictable, each one holding its own rhythm, its own secret. There was Whiskey Peak, the town of smiles and knives, where hospitality turned to treachery, teaching the crew that kindness in the Grand Line could hide a blade beneath its warmth, showing them that even those who laugh can be bought, that the sea is filled not only with monsters of the deep but of the human heart. And yet, in every deception the crew faced, their bond grew stronger, forged not in comfort, but in the shared understanding that trust, once tested and proven, becomes unbreakable. Soon after came Little Garden, a prehistoric island where time had forgotten to move forward, where giants Dory and Brogy fought an eternal duel for honor and pride. Two friends turned rivals by the passage of centuries, still smiling through battle as though war itself were only another kind of friendship, making the Straw Hats realize that the measure of a man is not in how long he lives, but in how faithfully he upholds his beliefs. The crew watched the giants laugh through pain, and in their eyes Luffy saw a reflection of his own destiny, the idea that a dream, even when it leads to endless struggle, is still worth following, that laughter can echo across generations if the heart that holds it never falters. It was during these early voyages that the crew's rhythm became second nature, each one trusting the other without need for command, their strengths interwoven like threads in a flag of rebellion. Zoro trained even in the still hours of dawn, his blades singing softly against the wind. Nami charted their course by lantern light, her eyes half-lidded, but never weary. Usopp repaired sails and whispered courage into the timbers. Sanji cooked warmth into every meal, each dish a quiet act of devotion. And through it all, Luffy's laughter filled the ship, his faith unspoken but absolute, turning chaos into music. As they ventured deeper, they began to see how the Grand Line was less a place and more a crucible one that purified intent, burning away false motives until only genuine dreams remained. Every island tested them differently, shaping their souls like waves shaping stone, and though danger stalked them constantly, the sea also seemed to cradle them, as if recognizing in them the echoes of its oldest story, the eternal dialogue between man and horizon. They encountered strange phenomena, waters that burned like fire, islands of snow beside jungles of heat, beasts that could swallow ships whole, skies streaked with colors that no painter could ever name, and through it all, the Going Merry pressed onward, creaking, living, enduring, its mast swaying like a heartbeat, its figurehead smiling through every storm. The ship had begun to change, not in form but in spirit, becoming an extension of their will, a sanctuary against madness, reminding them that home is not a place but a collection of souls who refuse to drift apart. There were nights when the sea lay perfectly still, the stars reflected so clearly upon its surface that it seemed they were sailing through the sky itself, and in those moments, when even the air seemed to sleep, The crew would rest upon the deck, watching constellations that no chart could capture, and Luffy would point toward the farthest one and declare that beyond it lay the one piece, the treasure that would prove his dream true. None of them knew what it truly was: gold, truth, freedom, laughter, but all believed in the meaning it held for him, and that belief, shared silently, became the glue that held their journey together. When they finally approached Drum Island, snow falling softly upon the waves, the first signs of winter creeping into their bones, they met a doctor named Kureha and a reindeer who dreamed of being human, showing again that the sea's greatest gift was transformation. For Tony Chopper, the little reindeer with a blue nose and a heart too big for the world, would soon join them, bridging the gap between human and beast, logic and miracle, reminding them all that even monsters can dream of kindness, that even isolation can give birth to healing. The Grand Line, with all its madness and wonder, was beginning to weave them together into something greater than any single destiny, a harmony of voices, dreams, and memories, traveling endlessly toward the same light. And as their laughter echoed beneath the falling snow, the world seemed to hold its breath once more, watching these tiny sparks of rebellion sail across its endless expanse, daring to believe that somewhere, hidden beneath waves and lies, the truth of everything waited, patient and shining, for those brave enough to reach it. The heat of the desert pressed down like an old memory, heavy and unrelenting, and the crew who had laughed their way through storms and snow now found themselves beneath a sun that seemed to watch them, silent and judging, as they entered a kingdom choking on its own history, a land called Alabasta, where drought and rumor and betrayal had mixed into a mirage of despair. The sand moved like waves, endless and whispering, and in that golden wasteland the Straw Hats discovered that the greatest battles are often fought not against monsters but against lies, for here truth had been buried beneath centuries of deceit, and the people had forgotten how to hope. The wind carried the name of Crocodile, a warlord of the sea, whose smile was a weapon, whose control over sand mirrored his control over fear, making him both savior and executioner, showing that power wrapped in good intentions is the most dangerous of all illusions. They had come to help a princess, though they did not yet know her in full. Nefertari Vivi, whose eyes still held the softness of royalty, but whose hands were calloused from wandering, who walked beside them as an equal, though her blood bound her to thrones and politics, and through her they learned what it meant to love a country even when that country had forgotten you. She carried the weight of millions upon her shoulders, smiling so others would not see how it crushed her, and Luffy, simple and pure, saw in her something he recognized: a dream too big to carry alone, a promise that could only be kept if someone else believed in it too. So he believed, because believing was all he had ever needed to change the world. The journey through Alabasta was long and filled with mirages, not only of water, but of truth itself. As the crew encountered bounty hunters and soldiers and rebels, each convinced that they were right, each certain the other was the enemy, showing how easy it is for the powerful to twist desperation into obedience. And yet, through every misunderstanding, through every wound inflicted by the hands of those who meant well, the Straw Hats never faltered, moving through the desert as though guided not by compass but by conviction, their presence itself becoming an act of rebellion against the world's apathy. They were not fighting for a flag or for payment, but for the idea that those who cry out in pain deserve to be heard, and that truth, even when buried, will always call out through the sands until someone digs it free. Crocodile's shadow stretched across the desert like a second sky. His organization, Baroque works, spreading through the land as quietly as the sandstorms that erased entire towns, and yet he believed himself invincible, untouchable, for the government recognized him as a hero, proof that even in this world, evil need not hide it, need only smile. His dream was not freedom but control, to claim the ancient weapon Pluton and become the new god of the sea, to bend the world into his version of order, and in doing so he revealed the deeper truth of One Piece, that every villain is a reflection of the same dream, twisted by fear, that freedom and domination are only opposite ends of the same current. As the Straw Hats traveled deeper into Alabasta, through cities where fountains had dried and children played in dust, they found themselves changed by the land. Zoro's calm sharpened like his blades, Sanji's chivalry became quiet ferocity, Usopp's lies began to take root in courage, and Nami's heart, once guarded, began to open under the weight of responsibility. Luffy remained the same, but it was a constancy that changed others: his refusal to bow to despair, his blind insistence that victory was possible, that one person could indeed make the difference between life and ruin. And as the final battle drew near, when Crocodile's plans had nearly succeeded and rain had not fallen in years, it was Luffy who faced him again and again, dying once and standing again, blood mixing with sand, laughter echoing through a kingdom that had forgotten what hope sounded like, showing that the will to rise again is stronger than any storm, stronger than any drought. When the sky finally broke and rain fell for the first time in years, it was as though the heavens themselves had exhaled, releasing the kingdom from its suffocating stillness. The people danced, not knowing whom to thank, and the Straw Hats slipped away quietly, their work done, leaving only footprints that the rain quickly erased, showing that heroes need no monuments, that real change is not in statues or speeches but in the silent renewal of belief. Vivi watched them go, her heart torn between duty and longing, knowing that though she could not join them, their laughter would forever echo in the corridors of her memory. And as their ship vanished over the horizon, she raised her hand to the sky, a silent farewell shaped in the form of a promise that she would continue their dream in her own way, in her own land, proving that even those who stay behind can still sail upon the seas of their heart. The Going Merry carried them onward once more, sails swollen by the same wind that had scattered Alabasta's clouds, and for the first time, perhaps, the crew began to understand what their journey truly meant. They were not simply searching for treasure. They were bearing witness to the world's hidden wounds, bringing laughter where there was silence, defiance where there was despair, turning every act of kindness into a ripple that might one day reach the ends of the earth. And though none of them would have said it aloud, they were beginning to realize that the One Piece, whatever it was, might not be a single, haunting object, but the sum of all these small, quiet victories, the proof that humanity, though flawed and fragile, could still choose joy. The desert faded behind them, swallowed by distance, and ahead lay clouds shaped like wings, an omen of new heights, of the sky itself beckoning. The next island was said to float above the world, unreachable, impossible, and yet, as the Going Merry tilted upward toward a column of light breaking through the clouds, Luffy laughed, the sound pure and fearless, carrying through the wind as though he were already there, already among the heavens. The crew followed his gaze, their hearts light, the memory of sand still clinging to their clothes, but the scent of adventure already replacing it. And as they rose toward the unknown, it felt as though the sea itself smiled, lifting them gently into the sky. The sky was not a place one simply reached. It was a boundary one transcended, And as the Going Merry ascended through that blinding pillar of light, water cascading upward like liquid starlight, the crew found themselves weightless, caught between sea and heaven, disbelief and wonder, their laughter mingling with the roar of the current that seemed to carry them toward a dream too fragile to exist. And yet it did, shimmering before them like a mirage that refused to fade. When the clouds parted, they saw it an island floating upon the sky, its surface gleaming white and gold, its air filled with the scent of salt and sunlight, a place that should not have been real, and yet here it was, Skypiea, the island of myth made tangible, showing once again that in the world of One Piece, belief itself can create new continents. They stepped onto clouds that held their weight, as though the heavens themselves welcomed them, and for a moment, even Luffy was silent, eyes wide, as though he had seen proof of something greater than all dreams combined. Around them, the people of the sky lived as though untouched by the sins of the world below, their wings small but proud, their songs echoing through the air like prayers. Yet beneath that peace lay tension, the kind that hums just beneath beauty, waiting to be revealed. For Skypiea was not paradise but a battlefield disguised as one, where faith and freedom were chained by the tyranny of a self-proclaimed god, a man named Enel, whose control over lightning made him believe himself divine, demonstrating how easily power convinces itself of holiness. As they explored this kingdom of clouds, the crew discovered fragments of an older truth buried beneath its radiance, relics of a civilization lost to time, and the name that whispered through the ruins was Shandora, a city of gold that had fallen from the blue seas to the white, its people scattered and remembered only through legend. It was said that their ancestors had fought not for treasure but for remembrance, for the right to have their names and dreams recorded in history, and now their descendants, the Shandians, waged war against the Sky People to reclaim what was stolen, two peoples fighting so long that they had forgotten the original wound. The Straw Hats, caught between heaven and history, found themselves once again in the heart of a story older than their own, proving that wherever they sailed, they were never merely travelers, but witnesses to the eternal struggle between truth and forgetting. The bell that once rang in Shandora's tower had not sounded in 400 years, its silence a wound carried by generations, and yet it waited, as if knowing that one day someone would hear its call again. Among those who carried this silent grief was a warrior named Wiper, whose rage was both blade and burden, fighting for a past he had never seen but felt deeply, proving that memory, even inherited, it can shape destiny. Luffy watched him fight and saw not an enemy but a reflection, another soul who refused to bow, another heart beating in time with defiance. And in that recognition lay the quiet, the promise that he would see the truth restored. And so it was that the battle for Skypiea became not merely a war of lightning and blade, but a symphony of dreams colliding, each strike and clash resonating through the clouds like thunder, making the heavens themselves tremble. Enel, perched upon his floating ark, believed himself untouchable, the living god of a sky he saw as his domain. But he had never faced someone like Luffy, a man immune to his lightning not by luck but by nature, rubber defying the storm, laughter defying fear. The fight between them was the clash of belief and arrogance, of divinity and humanity. And when Enel's thunder fell silent, it was not because he was defeated, but because he was understood, stripped of illusion, revealed as nothing more than a man who mistook isolation for power. When the dust of battle settled and the light returned, the golden bell of Shandora finally rang again, its sound carrying across the sky and down to the blue seas below. reaching the ears of an old explorer who had spent his life searching for proof that dreams could rise into the heavens. That explorer's name was Mont Blanc Cricket, a man mocked for believing in fairy tales, and when he heard that faint chime echo across the wind, he wept, because the sound meant that his ancestor Nolan's truth had been vindicated, that faith, though ridiculed and buried, had endured through centuries of doubt. The bell became a bridge between the worlds above and below, between belief and evidence, showing that truth, like light, always finds a way to shine through clouds. For the Straw Hats, Skypiea was more than victory, it was revelation. They had witnessed a world above the world, a place that existed only because people refused to stop believing in it, and in that realization lay a deeper meaning, that dreams are not destinations but dimensions, places created by those who refuse to accept limits. Luffy and his crew stood beneath that ringing bell, faces lit by gold and glory, their laughter echoing through the sky as if returning the gift the heavens had given them, and in that laughter was a promise that they would continue to climb higher, not in altitude but in heart. When they finally descended, clouds parting to reveal the endless blue once more, the Going Merry seemed to glide more easily, as though even the ship had been blessed by the sky, its timbers carrying the faint echo of that divine bell. Each of them carried something unseen, a lesson, a reminder, Nami, that maps can now include the heavens, Usopp, that stories can become real, Zoro, that even in paradise one must sharpen resolve, Sanji, that even the sky hungers, and Luffy, that no god can silence a true dream. And so they sailed on, the horizon once again wide and waiting, the sky no longer a limit but a memory, the sea beneath them whispering softly of the worlds yet unseen, the voices yet unheard, the dreams still waiting to rise. The wind grew colder as the sea darkened to steel, and the rhythm of the Going Merry's timbers changed. What had once been a cheerful creak had become a slow sigh, the sound of a ship beginning to understand that even dreams have bodies that wear down with time. The crew did not speak of it at first, for they were still caught in the joy of the sky they had left behind. But every sailor knows when something beneath their feet begins to ache, and so, as the horizon revealed a city of iron and water, of bridges and smoke and song, they knew without knowing that change waited for them there. The city was Water 7, a place built on the backs of shipwrights who could make wood defy the ocean, who turned craft into art, and within its canals ran not only water but memory, showing that even in a world ruled by the sea, there are those who have learned to build homes upon its shifting skin. Here they met men and women who spoke to ships, as others speak to gods, and among them was Frankie, a man more steel than flesh, loud as a storm, yet gentle in the ways that storms sometimes are, his body rebuilt after tragedy, his heart still stubbornly human. His laughter clanged like metal but carried the same warmth as Luffy's own, and in him the Straw Hats saw a reflection of the truth they would soon face, that to sail forever is to learn when to let go, when to repair, and when to rebuild from the wreckage of what once was. For the Going Merry, beloved and brave, had been wounded beyond healing, her keel cracked, her spirit exhausted, yet she still carried them through waves and cannon fire, refusing to surrender, proving that love, even when it fades, can hold the weight of an entire world for a little longer. The city itself seemed alive, water running through its veins, trains sliding across its surface as though pulled by tides instead of rails, a place where human invention had learned to mimic the sea's patience and cruelty alike. It was here that the world's machinery of power revealed another of its faces, in the form of CP9, agents of a hidden government whose smiles were masks for obedience, their blades cutting not for justice but for silence, demonstrating again that those who claim to protect the world often do so by erasing its inconvenient truths. Nico Robin, who had sailed with them since Alabasta, who had smiled but never fully belonged, found herself pursued by these shadows, her past dragging her back toward the darkness she had fled. She who had read the forbidden stones, the poneglyphs that whispered the world's true history, became the target of those who feared memory itself, and through her story the crew learned that ignorance is a kind of weapon, forged by those who cannot bear the weight of truth. When Robin left them, walking willingly into captivity to spare her friends, the Going Merry felt suddenly larger, emptier, the laughter echoing against its walls like ghosts. But Luffy, who understood nothing of politics or prophecy, understood everything about loyalty, and so he did what he always did. He followed his heart straight into the fire. The rescue that followed was not just another adventure. It was a declaration of existence. On Enies Lobby, the island of law where the government proclaimed itself infallible, they faced the world's full weight and refused to kneel, shouting into the flames that one woman's right to live was worth more than any system built on fear. The sky turned red with cannon fire. The sea boiled beneath their ship, and Robin's cry, "I want to live," rose above it all, cutting through smoke and gunpowder like a sunrise breaking night. That cry changed everything. It was the sound of someone choosing life after years of running from it, and in that moment, every crewmate found a piece of their own soul reflected back at them. Zoro's blades, Sanji's fire, Usopp's trembling hands, Nami's maps, all of it pointed toward one truth, that to protect another's dream is the highest form of one's own. The flag of the world government burned above them, black smoke curling into the wind like a warning and a prayer, and the world below took notice, for the laughter of a single crew had begun to shake the pillars of order itself. But even victory carries a shadow, and as they fled the island, the Going Merry, who had carried them farther than any of them had believed possible, could go no further. Her mast was cracked, her hull torn, and though Frankie and the shipwrights of Water 7 tried their best, even genius cannot heal what has already given its all. When the crew gathered to say goodbye, the sea was calm, as if the world itself had paused to listen. The ship that had been their home, their guardian, their silent friend, spoke to them one last time through crackling wood in memory, thanking them for letting her sail so long. They cried as the flames took her, each spark rising into the night like a memory set free. And in that farewell they learned the gentlest truth of all, that love is not diminished by endings, that farewells are merely new currents leading onward. The next morning the sea was bright again, impossibly blue, and in the harbor waited a new ship, larger, stronger, but built with the same warmth that had carried the old one. The Thousand Sunny, born of Frankie's hands and the crew's faith, rose like a phoenix from the ashes of the Merry, her lion figurehead grinning into the wind, showing that beginnings and endings are often the same tide seen from different shores. As they set sail once more, the city of Water 7 receded behind them, its waterfalls sparkling like tears, and the world ahead seemed both larger and kinder. The sound of hammers still echoed faintly in their hearts, the rhythm of creation that follows loss, reminding them that even after the hardest goodbye, the ocean will always make room for another journey, another dream. The fire that had consumed Enies Lobby did not fade quietly. Its smoke drifted across the world, curling through harbors and palaces alike, carrying with it a whisper of rebellion that no decree could silence. In every port and fortress people spoke the same rumor, that a small band of pirates had burned the banner of the world government and lived, that they had done it not for conquest, but for one woman's right to exist. The seas, long ruled by fear and obedience, began to stir with a different kind of tide, the kind that rises from the bottom rather than falling from the top. And though most did not yet know the name of Monkey D. Luffy, they felt the tremor of his laughter rippling through their dreams, making them believe, if only for a moment, that freedom might be something more than a story told in whispers. On the Thousand Sunny the crew sailed quietly for a time, their laughter returning like morning light after storm clouds, yet each of them carried the weight of what they had done, a weight that felt both terrifying and beautiful. The seas seemed to know it too. The waves gentled around them, as if even the ocean respected those who had shouted their truth into the fire. Robin, now among them not as a fugitive but as family, sat often upon the deck with her eyes half closed, feeling the sunlight against her face, as though learning the warmth of trust for the first time. And when she smiled, it was not a smile of calculation, but of peace. They had saved her, but in doing so she had saved them, teaching them that compassion is not weakness but rebellion, that to fight for another's heart is to affirm one's own humanity. They drifted then toward a strange island, one shrouded in mist and moonlight, where the sound of laughter had a hollow ring, and the shadows danced even when the light did not touch them. It was called Thriller Bark, a ship so vast it was mistaken for land, captained by a man who once had chased greatness but found only emptiness, Gecko Moria, a pirate who had lost his crew to the New World and filled his loneliness with stolen souls. The island was a place of mockery, of ghosts without memory, of zombies that imitated life, showing that immortality without purpose is only another form of death. Here the Straw Hats met Brook, a skeleton who walked and spoke and laughed, though his body had long since turned to bone, his soul bound to the world by a fruit's curse and a promise left unfulfilled. He had once been a musician, part of a crew that had sung their way across the seas, and even when death took them, he kept their song alive, whispering to the empty sky the same refrain again and again, yo-ho-ho-ho, Bink's sake, as if the melody itself could carry their memory home. When he met Luffy, it was as if two melodies harmonized by accident, joy meeting sorrow, both resonating with the same note of endless persistence, proving that laughter is a language that even death cannot forget. The island tested them in strange ways. They fought not for treasure but for the return of shadows, for the right to stand in the sunlight. And in each battle they confronted the reflection of their own fears, Zoro facing the weight of pain itself, Sanji, his compassion twisted by mockery, Nami, her own fragility disguised as anger. In the end, it was not strength that saved them but loyalty, the invisible thread that tied each of their hearts together even when separated by fear and fog. And when morning finally broke upon Thriller Bark, the sunlight cut through centuries of gloom, making the air taste of forgiveness, showing that even the darkest places in the world can be healed by the simplest sound, a friend's laugh returning through the dawn. Brook joined them afterward, his violin resting against his ribs like an old friend returned, his humor terrible yet soothing, his presence both eerie and comforting, the embodiment of every paradox that defines One Piece itself, death and laughter, tragedy and song, despair and hope mingling in perfect balance. And with him came the echo of a promise made long ago, to meet again with a whale named Laboon, waiting patiently at the entrance to the Grand Line, a creature who sang to the horizon every day, believing that his friends would one day return. The thought of that whale waiting still beneath the waves added a strange tenderness to their journey, for it reminded them that time is only another ocean, and those who keep faith can cross it. When they left Thriller Bark, the world seemed to tilt again. News spread faster than ships could sail: the defeat of Moria, the burning of Enies Lobby, the name Straw Hat Luffy, whispered with both admiration and dread. The Navy began to move, their admirals stirring like giants from sleep, the world government tightening its grip upon the seas. Yet the laughter aboard the Sunny did not fade. It grew louder, freer, as if mocking the fear that sought to cage it, because they had learned by now that the ocean does not belong to those who try to rule it. It belongs to those who love it enough to let it break them. As twilight spread across the waves, the Sunny sailed on, its lion figurehead cutting through the last gleam of dying sun, the sky bleeding into purple and gold. Robin read softly from her ancient texts. Usopp mended the sails. Frankie hummed to himself beneath the deck, and Luffy slept upon the mast, hat tilted over his face, smiling even in dreams. The world below conspired and plotted, lines of power shifting like tides. But up here, between the stars and the sea, there was only peace, a fragile kind of peace, born not of safety, but of acceptance, the understanding that every storm, no matter how fierce, will eventually lead to calm. They did not yet know that the next shore would shatter that calm, that the sea ahead hid an island where slavery still existed, and gods walked as men, where laughter would again be tested by cruelty. For now, they rested in the half-light, their silhouettes etched against the horizon, drifting toward destiny's next cruelty, with hearts still full, proving once again that the greatest act of defiance in any world is to keep dreaming. The sea changed before they ever saw the island. The color deepened, and the wind carried a stillness that did not belong to the open ocean, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Strange bubbles floated upon the surface, iridescent and fragile, rising from the unseen forest beneath the waves, and when they burst, they left behind the faint scent of resin and sunlight, a sweetness that felt almost artificial. This was the threshold of Sabaody Archipelago, the place where the ocean met the sky's shadow, where trees grew so vast their roots became islands, their sap turning into bubbles that rose endlessly toward heaven. The thousand Sunny drifted among them like a dream made solid, and for a time the crew marveled at the beauty of it, unaware that beneath that shimmering peace lay one of the world's oldest wounds. The archipelago was a city of contrasts, of laughter that hid chains, of music that masked the rhythm of despair. Here the rich and powerful from the Holy Land above came to play, walking among commoners as gods disguised as men. And here too were the slave markets, where lives were priced and paraded as curiosities. The air itself seemed divided, half filled with light and commerce, half heavy with fear. The celestial dragons moved through the streets surrounded by soldiers and silence, their faces hidden behind glass, the reflection of their own vanity blinding them, and the people bowed because to look directly upon them was to invite death. The straw hats, who had defied governments and gods alike, found themselves in the heart of that hypocrisy, and though they tried at first to stay unnoticed, their very existence was rebellion enough. It was here that they first met the other rising stars of the era, the 11 supernovas, pirates whose names were beginning to echo through the world, each carrying their own version of the same impossible dream. Some were cruel, some noble, all dangerous, and together they represented a truth the world could not yet face, that the age of control was ending. Among them, Luffy stood out not for power but for purity, for the way he refused to measure himself against anyone. His presence unsettled even the ambitious, for there was no ambition in him beyond freedom. He laughed with Kid, sparred with Zoro, shared sake with strangers, his heart open and unguarded, and for a moment it seemed the island might hold peace after all. But peace in Sabaody was an illusion. It shattered with a single act, as fragile as the bubbles that surrounded them. When a celestial dragon struck down a man and called it sport, the world expected silence, as it always had. But Luffy, who had never understood the language of fear, walked forward and struck the so-called god across the face, the sound of that blow echoing like thunder across the archipelago. The crowd gasped. The world froze. It was the proud sound of 1,000 years of obedience cracking open. In that instant, there was no turning back. The Navy would come, the admirals would descend, and the name Straw Hat would burn itself into the world's memory. Yet even as chaos erupted, as cannons roared and people fled, the crew did not regret it. They had seen injustice and answered it in the only language they knew: action. The retaliation was swift and merciless. The Marines arrived in force, and with them came Bartholomew Kuma, the silent giant whose very presence stilled the wind. His power was unlike anything they had faced, bending reality as easily as one might move air, and one by one he sent them away, his massive hand pressing against each of their chests, erasing them from the island like falling stars vanishing into night. They did not die. They were scattered, flung to distant corners of the world, each to face their own trial alone. Luffy reached for them, his voice breaking, his hands empty, and for the first time since setting sail, he felt truly powerless. The laughter that had once carried him now turned to silence. The ocean that had always welcomed him suddenly vast and cold. The island fell quiet once more. The bubbles rose as they always had, indifferent to the suffering below. The world moved on, as it always did, but something had changed forever. The myth of invincibility that the world government wore, like armor, had cracked, and the legend of the Straw Hats began to spread like fire. They were gone, but their echo remained, whispered by those who had seen that single act of defiance, that punch that had broken the heavens. In taverns and back alleys, in the barracks of Marines and the decks of pirate ships, the same story was told again and again, that a boy with a straw hat had struck a god and lived. On distant shores, the scattered crew awoke beneath unfamiliar skies. Zoro in a land of swords, Sanji on an island ruled by hunger and inversion, Nami among scientists who saw weather as a weapon, Usopp in a jungle that made lies come true, Frankie in a frozen shipyard, Brook in a desolate kingdom, Robin in a place of slavery reborn. Each faced solitude like a mirror, learning in silence what companionship had once taught them in laughter. They trained, they suffered, they grew, and somewhere, upon an island of women hidden from the world, Luffy sat beneath a quiet sky, mourning not defeat but separation, the emptiness of a sea without his friends. Yet, even in despair, he found a kind of strength, the understanding that to protect those you love sometimes means becoming something greater than you were. The world called it the Straw Hat disappearance, the end of a story. But stories, like tides, never end. They only turn. Beneath the waves, the sea whispered their names, carrying them toward reunion, toward the dawn that always follows the longest night. And far above, unseen but ever watchful, the bubbles of Sabaody continued to rise and burst, as if even the island itself mourned what it had witnessed, a family torn apart for daring to be free. The world was breaking, and the sea itself seemed to groan under the weight of what was coming, for when the age of pirates first began, it had been born of laughter, but the moment that followed, Sabaody was born of grief, and in that grief, the horizon darkened as though to prepare itself for war. The Marineford arc did not begin with cannon fire, but with a whisper that rippled across every ocean, the whisper of an execution, the announcement that Portgas D, Ace, son of the Pirate King and brother to the boy with the straw hat, would be put to death by the world government. It was not only a punishment but a message, a declaration that freedom, once again, would kneel before order. Yet in that same moment, far from the gallows, Luffy, still trembling from loss, heard the news and felt something awaken within him, something greater than anger, greater than fear, because Ace was not simply a family. He was proof that love can exist even in a world built on betrayal. He did not hesitate. He did not plan. He did what he always did, moved forward with his heart as compass, escaping the island of women that had sheltered him, gathering allies from chaos and chance. He set his course for the greatest fortress in the world, the marine headquarters of Marineford, where the strongest of all stood ready to end a legend. Around him, the world held its breath. Fleets moved like continents across the water, and every pirate who had ever called Ace brother came to join the storm. Whitebeard's ship, vast as a mountain and gentle as a heart, rose from the horizon with sails unfurled, the old man himself standing upon its prow like a god of the sea. His name, Edward Newgate, carried weight enough to silence cannons. His dream had never been gold or fame but family, a fleet of sons and daughters bound not by blood but by choice, proving that the truest kings are those who rule hearts, not lands. The battle that followed was not a clash of pirates and marines. It was a clash of ideals, of past and future, of love against law. The sky split open with lightning. The ocean boiled under the shock waves of giants and admirals, and still, at the center of it all, Ace knelt in chains, smiling faintly, his spirit unbroken, as though he knew that freedom was already won, simply because his brother was coming. Luffy tore through that war like a storm given human form, his body battered, his will undimmed, making allies of enemies and miracles of impossibility. Around him the great names of the era fought and fell, Marco the Phoenix rising from fire, the admirals Aokiji and Kizaru shining like cold stars, Garp, the hero of the Marines, torn between duty and love, each blow echoing with history. Whitebeard himself faced the end with laughter, his massive hands shaking the sea one last time, his voice thundering above the roar of war. "The One Piece is real," he declared, and, in that moment, he did what Roger had done before him. He reignited the world's dream. His body fell, unmoving, but he did not fall as a man dies. He fell as an age passes, upright, unbowed, leaving behind an emptiness that would one day be filled by those who heard his final words. When Ace was finally freed, when the chains shattered and the brothers stood side by side, the world seemed to pause, the war's chaos dimming for the smallest instant of joy. But fate, in this story, is never merciful for long. The fist of Akainu, the magma burning with righteous cruelty, struck through the air and ended that moment, piercing Ace's body as he turned to shield his brother, choosing to die as he had lived, protecting laughter with his own life. Luffy's scream cut through the world like the breaking of a wave. For the first time his laughter failed him, and the boy who had faced gods and kings fell silent, his heart unable to carry the weight of what he had lost. Around him the sea raged, the ships burned, and the world shifted. The old guard fell, the balance that had held since Roger's time crumbled, and through the smoke and sorrow came the faint dawn of something new, something unnamed. The war ended, but peace did not follow, because peace built on loss is only an echo. The survivors retreated to their corners of the world, the Marines to their justice, the pirates to their dreams, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the news spread like a tide that Whitebeard was dead, that Ace was dead, and that the seas were open once more. Luffy woke days later, his wounds still raw, his voice hoarse from grief. He did not speak for a long time, staring at the bandages that wrapped his hands, as if afraid to move lest the world break again. But in the stillness came the voice of another Jinbei, the fish man whose strength matched his gentleness, telling him that no one dies whose dream still inspires the living. And Luffy listened, slowly, painfully, learning once more how to breathe, how to stand, how to laugh. The sea around him was calm again, deceptively so, as if waiting for the next wind, the next tide, the next step. And when at last he stood, eyes red but clear, he raised his hand to the sky and declared what every sailor who has ever loved and lost must one day say, that he would keep sailing, no matter how far the storm. Somewhere, perhaps beyond the reach of maps, the sound of Ace's final words still echoed, "Thank you for loving me," and in that echo lay the shape of the new world. The era that had begun with Roger's smile ended with Whitebeard's roar. And now, in the quiet that followed, a boy with a straw hat carried both within him. The horizon stretched wide and waiting, and though grief weighed upon the world like a heavy fog, the sea, eternal and forgiving, whispered the same promise it always had: sail forward. After the war, the sea fell strangely quiet, as though exhausted from its own fury, the waves folding themselves into smaller size, the gulls circling without sound, and in that silence the boy who had once filled the world with laughter drifted toward an island of women hidden by calm belts and storms, a paradise that allowed no men, yet made an exception for grief. Luffy lay beneath palm trees whose leaves whispered of things older than sorrow, the salt of tears mixing with the salt of the ocean, and he realized that for the first time since he had set sail, he was not thinking about adventure or treasure, but about absence, about how the horizon can look endless yet feel empty when those you love are no longer waiting at its edge. His mind returned again and again to the faces of his crew, scattered like constellations torn from the same sky, and the ache in his chest became heavier than any wound, for there are injuries that do not bleed yet consume the heart all the same. It was here that Jinbei remained by his side, steady as the tide, speaking little but always near, a reminder that companionship does not need words to be real. He told Luffy that pain, too, could be a compass, that loss could lead him to strength if he let it teach rather than destroy. But Luffy, who had always fought the world with open hands and a grin, did not yet understand how to fight what was invisible, so he shouted, he cried, he broke against the sand until his body gave out, and only then, in that final surrender, did the ocean answer him, the same way it answers all who love it gently. The wind touched his face like forgiveness, and somewhere deep within that stillness, he began to hear another sound, the echo of Rayleigh's laughter, the former first mate of the Pirate King, who appeared like a ghost made of memory and sunlight. Rayleigh, the Dark King, had once sailed with Roger to the very ends of the world, had seen the dawn and dusk of an age, and in Luffy he saw not a boy but an echo of something that had never died, the same unbreakable hunger for freedom. He offered to teach him not how to fight the sea, but how to listen to it, to feel the rhythm that binds all life together. And so Luffy began his training on that small island hidden from the world, learning to quiet his mind until he could hear the heartbeat of the forest, the breath of the animals, the pulse of the world itself. It was not easy. It was not kind. But slowly, his laughter returned, not the reckless sound of a boy racing toward a dream, but the steady laughter of someone who has walked through sorrow and found that it cannot drown him. While he trained, the world changed without him. The seas became more violent, the currents of power shifted, and everywhere the name Straw Hat became both a hope and a warning. In distant lands, his crew faced their own trials. Zoro bowed before Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman, and cut through his own pride until discipline became instinct. Sanji chased hunger across a nightmare of opposites, learning to cook for those who once mocked him, transforming shame into skill. Nami learned the language of storms from the sky's own architects, mastering the science that had once terrified her. Usopp, who had always exaggerated his courage, found himself forced to live it among the jungles of monsters, and in doing so discovered that bravery is simply fear that keeps moving. Frankie rebuilt himself, turning his grief into blueprints for the future, while Brook sang to empty halls until his music became strength enough to raise the spirits of others. And Robin, buried among revolutionaries, found that the world's hidden truths were not weapons, but seeds waiting for the right time to bloom. 2 years passed like a breath, and a lifetime both. The ocean forgot nothing, yet forgave everything. When at last the crew began to return to Sabaody, each from a different corner of the world, it was as though the sea itself held its breath in anticipation, watching its favorite wanderers reunite. The forest of bubbles shimmered again, but this time the air felt different, heavier, older, charged with memory. They had all changed. The boy who once shouted without thought now carried silence within him, a quiet certainty that replaced the innocence of his earlier laughter. Yet when they saw each other again, when familiar faces broke through the mist and old voices filled the air, the years fell away like morning fog. Luffy's grin returned in full, stretching toward the sky, and for a moment it was as if the war had never happened, as if the world had never broken. They set sail once more aboard the Sunny, the wood creaking not with exhaustion but with joy, the sails catching the wind of destiny renewed. The new world awaited them, a place where the sea was wilder, the islands stranger, the dangers deeper, and the dreams sharper. Above them, the sky was the color of possibility, and below them, the ocean hummed like a living thing, whispering of trials yet to come. None of them knew what awaited beyond that horizon, but they no longer needed to know. It was enough that they were together, that the laughter which had once been silenced now echoed across the waves again. The age of mourning had ended, and a new era, an era of defiance, of wonder, of rebirth was beginning, with the Straw Hat flag rising once again against the endless blue, fluttering like a heartbeat, reminding the world that even in its darkest hours, the sea still belongs to those who dare to dream. The sea beneath the red line was a place of silence and pressure, of colors so deep they looked like thought itself, and as the Sunny descended into the dark, carried by the coated bubble that held their breath and faith together, the crew looked out through glass at a world most would never see. The surface light dimmed into shadow. The sound of waves gave way to the hum of depth, and fish of impossible beauty drifted past like living constellations. The journey downward felt endless, yet peaceful, like falling into a dream that had no bottom. Luffy pressed his face against the glass with the wonder of a child, while Nami watched the instruments carefully, and somewhere behind them, the timbers of the ship groaned softly, as if to remind them that even dreams need air. This was the path to Fishman Island, the hidden kingdom beneath the sea, a place spoken of in whispers by sailors who feared its mysteries and awaited by those who believed in its legend. The pressure mounted, And then, suddenly, the darkness gave way to light again, not the sunlight of the world above, but the soft blue glow of coral forests, their branches swaying in invisible currents, illuminating castles carved from shells and glass, streets lined with pearls that shone like small moons. It was a world both alien and achingly human, where laughter echoed strangely through the water, distorted yet sincere. The fishmen and merfolk lived here, in the space between myth and memory, their history long and bitter, marked by chains and silence. They had been called monsters by those who lived above, enslaved and despised for the simple fact of being different. Their strength turned against them by fear, and yet, despite all this, they built beauty, built peace, built families beneath the weight of prejudice. The air inside the Sunny filled with the sound of quiet awe as the crew entered this realm, their eyes wide with wonder, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that the ocean could hold both paradise and pain. At the heart of the island stood Ryugu Palace, a castle like a dream of the sea itself, its towers shaped like coral spires, its colors shifting with the light, and within it ruled King Neptune, a giant whose laughter shook the halls, and whose kindness matched his size. But it was his daughter, Princess Shirahoshi, who drew the sea's attention, her beauty so luminous it seemed to calm the water around her, her voice a melody that reached even the smallest fish, making them dance. Yet behind her gentle eyes lay sorrow, for she had spent years confined within her chamber, a prisoner of fear and prophecy, for the world whispered that she was the ancient weapon Poseidon reborn, the power to command the sea kings themselves, the creatures whose size defied imagination and whose voices could change the tides. Her gift was both miracle and curse, a reminder that power, even when divine, is never free. The Straw Hats came not as conquerors but as witnesses, their presence disturbing the fragile peace that hung over the island. Hody Jones and his followers, born of hatred and envy, sought to drag the island into darkness, to destroy the fragile bridge between human and fishman that had taken centuries to build. They called for war in the name of revenge, twisting pain into justification, their hearts poisoned by a past they could not let go. Luffy listened to their words and felt only sadness, because he could see what they could not. That hatred, even when righteous, is a cage that grows tighter the longer one wears it. When the battle came, it was not of equal strength. It was faith against fury, compassion against despair. Luffy fought with his usual ferocity, but beneath every blow there was something new, an understanding that victory without empathy was hollow. When the dust settled and the waves stilled, the island stood reborn beneath a sky of light refracted through the sea. The people gathered, the chains of old grudges falling away like silt, and above them the great sea kings moved, drawn by the princess's song, their voices deep and vast, speaking to her in tones older than memory. They told her that the time of separation was ending, that soon the sea and the land would remember their shared beginning. Luffy, watching her cry as the voices filled the water, felt something stir in him, something ancient, something that hummed in harmony with the waves, as though the will of the ocean itself had chosen him as its messenger. He made his promise then, not to rule, not to possess, but to protect, to ensure that one day humans and fishmen could live beneath the same sun without fear. As they left Fishman Island, the bubble rising slowly through blue toward the world above, the crew looked back at the glowing coral and felt that they were leaving behind not just another adventure, but a chapter in the story of humanity itself. For the ocean had shown them once again that beauty and pain are always intertwined, that even in the darkest depths the light finds a way to bloom. Nami drew maps of it in silence. Sanji wiped tears he pretended were seawater, and Luffy stood at the bow, staring upward, whispering to the sunlight, filtering down through miles of sea, promising to see it again from the surface someday. The pressure lightened, the darkness thinned, the surface gleamed above them, vast and waiting. When at last the sunny broke through, shattering the film between ocean and sky, the spray turned to diamonds in the morning light, and they all breathed in the air of the new world, the half of the grand line where legends are born and dreams are tested. Behind them, the sea closed gently, holding Fishman Island in its embrace, and ahead, the horizon curved like a smile. The crew laughed together, the sound echoing over the waves, carried far and wide, as if the world itself were laughing with them again. The wind in the new world was not like the wind of the seas they had known. It was wild, restless, alive, carrying scents that belonged to no single season, whispering through the rigging like a riddle no one could solve. Storms came and went in minutes, and the ocean itself seemed to change moods with every sunrise, as if testing those who dared to cross it. Yet for all its chaos, the crew laughed as they always did, for this was the world they had dreamed of, the sea of the strong, where every island held a different rhythm, a different truth, and where adventure itself had no end. Their first destination came not through choice but through chance, the log pose trembling wildly before pointing toward a sea of fire and ice locked together, a contradiction so vast it seemed impossible. This was Punk Hazard, an island born of a battle between gods of science and power, half consumed by flames that never died, half frozen in eternal winter, showing how even nature can become a monument to human arrogance. The heat struck them first, the air shimmering like molten glass, rivers of lava carving slow paths through stone, yet only a short distance away. Snow fell so thick it muffled sound. The island was scarred, yet beautiful in its contradiction, and in that beauty lay warning. Here the government had once conducted its most secret experiments, projects abandoned, truths buried, men turned into monsters and called progress. Among the ghosts of that ambition walked Caesar Clown, a scientist whose laughter was sharp and hollow, who played at godhood with the ease of a man long divorced from conscience. His gas-filled experiments had turned children into subjects, their laughter replaced by screams, their growth accelerated by the very poison meant to improve them. The crew who had faced gods and giants felt something colder here, something that smelled of laboratories and lost souls, and it filled even Luffy's laughter with a kind of anger he rarely knew. They found survivors, small, frightened children whose eyes were too old, whose veins carried toxins disguised as miracles. Nami held them as if trying to warm them back into innocence, while Chopper worked feverishly to undo what science had done, muttering through tears that medicine was supposed to heal, not hurt. Luffy said nothing at first, watching Caesar from across the flames, his expression unreadable, until he stepped forward, calm as the tide before a storm, and punched the scientist through his own illusion of control. The sound of that impact, like a verdict delivered by the world itself. For all his simplicity, Luffy understood something that intellect often forgets, that no genius can claim progress if it costs another's laughter. But the island held more than monsters of science. It held memory, and the echo of an old war between two men whose names shaped the age itself, Akainu and Aokiji, admirals who had fought for 10 days to decide the future of justice, turning the island into fire and frost. Their battle had ended long ago, but its mark remained, a physical embodiment of the world's divided heart, one half burning with absolute order, the other frozen by doubt. As the crew crossed that jagged line between heat and cold, they could feel the tension of an era still unresolved, the sense that the true war, the one that began long before any of them were born, had only just begun. Among the chaos they met Trafalgar Law, the surgeon of death, whose eyes carried the same quiet fire as their captain's, though his smile was smaller and his burdens heavier. Law was no friend, yet no enemy, either. He was a man bound by his own sense of right, by a past he could not let go. When he proposed an alliance, his words felt less like strategy and more like fate. Two wills of D meeting in the storm, the kind of meeting that changes the direction of history. Luffy agreed, not because he trusted him, but because he believed in the rhythm of the sea, in the intuition that sometimes destiny wears the face of a stranger. Together they fought Caesar's chaos, liberated the children, and uncovered fragments of truths that the world had tried to bury the experiments on giants. The manipulation of power, the invisible hand of a system that called itself justice while feeding on its own people. The laboratory burned, its flames mixing with the eternal ones outside, as if the island itself was cleansing its own corruption. When they finally sailed away, the smoke followed them until it dissolved into cloud, leaving behind an island that would smolder forever, a reminder that progress without empathy is only destruction in disguise. The journey from Punk Hazard was not quiet. The sea, restless again, began to whisper of names: Kaido, Doflamingo, Wano, the currents themselves, shifting as though carrying messages between unseen titans. Law's alliance was a line drawn in the water, a challenge flung at the world's balance. In the distance, the gears of revolution began to turn, and the crew felt it even through the laughter that filled their nights, a sense that the story they had been sailing through was about to reach its center, that every battle and every friendship had been leading them towards something immense, something that would either free the world or drown it. Luffy sat at the bow as always, the wind in his hair, his hat shadowing his eyes, the smile on his lips quiet now but unbroken. He did not speak of destiny or prophecy, though the sea had begun to whisper his name in both. He only looked ahead, where the clouds were gathering and the horizon shimmered with promise, and laughed softly, the sound like a heartbeat carried by the wind. Behind him, his crew went about their work, Zoro sharpening blades, Nami plotting stars, Sanji stirring the night's meal, Robin reading history in the light of the moon, and together they moved forward, the Sunny gliding like a living dream through the dark, its lanterns glowing against the infinite blue. The world was changing, the seas were trembling, but on that ship, beneath that endless sky, hope remained the strongest current, pulling them toward a dawn still hidden but inevitable, waiting beyond the next storm. The sea ahead was bright and cruel, sunlight scattering across its surface like shards of broken glass, and in that light the world of masks began to appear, an island where music never stopped and joy was forced to dance. The log pose trembled again, and when it steadied it pointed toward Dressrosa, a kingdom draped in color and deception, where flowers fell from the sky like confetti, where laughter echoed through the streets yet somehow did not sound entirely human. From a distance it looked like paradise. Up close it smelled faintly of sorrow. The people smiled too much, their eyes shining with a kind of obedient happiness that only tyranny can create. And above it all towered a palace of glass and gold, home to the man who called himself king, a man whose smile could cut deeper than any blade. Don Quixote Doflamingo ruled Dressrosa as a puppeteer rules a stage, every string invisible yet impossible to break, every motion choreographed in advance. He was a fallen celestial dragon who had turned his exile into theater, a prince stripped of divinity who reinvented himself as God, proving that cruelty, when refined enough, becomes art. He spoke of freedom while choking those who sought it, turning families against one another, feeding the people illusions so intoxicating they forgot what truth felt like. His power, the strings of the Ito Ito no Mi, stretched farther than anyone could see, attaching not only to bodies but to hearts, to memories, rewriting what people believed until reality itself bent to his will. In Dressrosa, the past was forbidden, grief was outlawed, and the smiles were constant because they were compelled. Luffy and his crew entered this carnival of control uninvited, unaware that beneath the laughter lay one of the world's most delicate lies, one that reached from the throne room to the depths of history itself. The alliance with Law brought them here, but the purpose that guided it was deeper than revenge. Law's heart still burned with the memory of Corazon, the man who had saved him as a child, a Marine who had betrayed his uniform for love of a single boy, and Doflamingo had taken that love from him with a smile. The battle to come was not merely for power or justice, it was an attempt to unmake despair, to undo a cruelty that had shaped the world's rhythm for too long. As the Straw Hats moved through the city, they saw its dual faces. Children turned into toys who could not be remembered by those they loved. Workers singing praises to a king who stole their lives in secret. Soldiers smiling as they fought wars they did not believe in. The island was a mirror held to the world itself, reflecting its hypocrisy in every golden street. At the center of the chaos was the Colosseum, a place where heroes and slaves fought to amuse the masses, where blood mixed with cheers, where dignity became spectacle. Luffy entered it, disguised and laughing, not for glory but to win a fruit that carried the soul of his fallen brother, Ace the Mera. Mera no Mi, the fire reborn. The arena thundered with the sound of thousands, but beneath the roar he could feel the presence of something ancient, stirring, the sense that the dreams of the dead never vanish but wait patiently to be inherited. When he fought, it was not just his fists that moved, but every memory that had brought him this far, every promise, every laugh, every loss. And when the fire of Ace once more lit the sky, reborn in Sabo's hands, the world seemed to pause to watch it, to remember, to grieve, to hope. The battle for Dressrosa unfolded like an opera without end, layers of truth peeling away with every act. The underground revealed its secrets factories producing weapons and slaves beneath the smiling streets, connections to the celestial dragons, the shadow of Kaido looming beyond the horizon. The toys regained their human forms, their tears returning along with their names, and the laughter that once masked despair became laughter of deliverance. Doflamingo stood above it all, his threads cutting through buildings, through sky, through the illusion of control itself. A man born in the highest heaven who chose to become the devil on earth. Yet even he was only another fragment of the same story, the story of power born from fear. When Luffy faced him, it was not the battle of good and evil, but of two definitions of freedom colliding, one that sought to rise above the world and one that sought to live within it. Doflamingo's world was one where strings tied everything together, where control was mistaken for safety, where chaos was the enemy. Luffy's world was one where chaos was life, where the wind could blow without permission, where laughter was stronger than order. Their fists met again and again, breaking the sky, shaking the island, turning the air into thunder. And when Doflamingo finally fell, his strings severed, the silence that followed felt heavier than victory. The people cried, laughed, knelt, danced, unable to tell whether they were celebrating freedom or mourning the years they had lost. The sun rose on a kingdom without a king, its ruins still warm, its air thick with dust and possibility. Law stood beside Luffy, exhausted, bleeding, yet lighter than he had been since childhood. He looked toward the horizon and saw not vengeance but continuation, the understanding that even broken dreams can still point the way forward. The alliance had survived, but something deeper had been forged, a respect born not of convenience but of shared belief, the recognition that the world could only change if those who carried pain refused to become its next tyrants. As the Thousand Sunny left Dressrosa's shore, the crew looked back one last time, watching the petals fall again, no longer symbols of lies but of renewal. Robin's gaze lingered on the distant palace, her mind tracing the connections between this kingdom's secret and the greater web she had begun to uncover, the void century, the lost history of the world. Somewhere beneath the waves, in the heart of the earth itself, the truth waited like a sleeping giant, and every island they freed, every heart they touched, was another step toward waking it. The wind shifted, warm and salt-sweet, and Luffy laughed, his hat tilted toward the sun, his voice carrying across the open water. The storm that had begun in Dressrosa was not ending. It was moving, spreading, gathering strength, and as the sky darkened with the promise of new trials, the world listened, trembling, as the age of false peace began to crack. The sea grew sweet before they even saw the island. The wind carried the scent of sugar and cream, a trick of the air that made the ocean feel like syrup, and when the mists parted they saw towers that looked like pastries and rivers that glittered with chocolate. It was the kind of beauty that makes you uneasy, a perfection that hums too loudly, too precise to be real. The island belonged to a woman who had turned hunger into empire, a Yonko whose laughter shook the sky. Her name was Charlotte Linlin, called Big Mom, and everything in her world looked like joy until you noticed the trembling behind the smiles. Her land was a promised safety in exchange for your soul. Once a month she took fragments of the people's lifespan as tax, their fear feeding the living. Scenery around them, trees and cakes, whispering secrets in voices stolen from the once alive. Even paradise, it seemed, needs sacrifices to stay sweet. They came here not to fight, but to rescue. Sanji, who had followed them through every storm, had been taken from their side by blood he thought he had escaped, pulled back into a family that treated affection like debt. The Germa kingdom of science and soldiers had no room for warmth, its people bred for battle, its sons engineered like weapons. Sanji's father had called him failure for choosing compassion over cruelty, and now Big Mom intended to bind the two families in marriage, to fuse royal science and monstrous appetite into a new dominion. Luffy would never allow it. He declared they would bring Sanji back, eat cake, and leave simple as always, impossible as always. Whole Cake Island was a labyrinth of taste and terror, forests where candy flowers whispered lies, seas guarded by jellyfish that sang, soldiers baked from dough and frosting that bled jam instead of blood. Every step felt like walking through a child's dream that had lived too long and learned to resent its dreamer. The crew split to survive, Nami turning tempests into allies, Chopper and Carrot weaving through mirrors, Brook slipping unseen between walls of sugar glass, and Sanji, trapped in velvet halls, stood before his past, made flesh brothers with steel hearts, a sister who smiled through guilt, a father who measured worth by obedience. He wore fine clothes again, his hands bound by courtesy instead of rope, and in his eyes burned the same fire that once fed his cooking. Big Mom's voice carried everywhere, a melody and a threat. She wanted all the races of the world gathered at her table, a family of every kind of life, yet her love devoured what it touched. She dreamed of unity, but only under her hunger. Her children adored and feared her, hundreds of them, each a story of indulgence and neglect. Among them was Katakuri, a warrior who hid his mouth behind a scarf because perfection cannot afford imperfection, and when he met Luffy, the clash between them felt like the meeting of two philosophies: control against chaos, prediction against possibility. Katakuri could see seconds into the future, but Luffy fought as if he trusted the universe to improvise with him, every blow a conversation between fate and defiance. Their battle tore through mirrors, through time itself, and when it ended, the mirror cracked, but the two of them stood not as enemies, but as acknowledgments of each other's truth. Meanwhile, Sanji baked the greatest cake the world had ever seen, not out of fear but love, a dessert meant to calm a monster's rage. In that act he proved that kindness is not weakness, that creation can be rebellion, that feeding others can be a weapon more powerful than hate. When Big Mom tasted it, tears slid down her enormous cheeks, memories of childhood flickering across her eyes, the days before greed, before loneliness, turned appetite into armor. For a heartbeat, the island seemed to remember it could be gentle. Then hunger returned, as it always does, but something inside her had shifted, if only slightly, as though the flavor of compassion could not be entirely forgotten. The Straw Hats escaped through storm and fire, their ship pursued by fleets and fury, the sea itself rising in protest, yet they laughed even as cannons rained down. Jinbei stood at the helm, steady as stone, declaring his place among them, a man of the sea who finally found a flag worth serving. Behind them, the island of sweets burned at its edges, its rivers of chocolate boiling, the air thick with the smell of sugar turning to smoke. Ahead lay the promise of Wano, a land closed off from the world, waiting like a dream inside a storm. As the sunny vanished into the distance, Luffy turned once toward the horizon they had survived, and whispered a thank you to Sanji, to his crew, to the sea itself, for the taste of life still on his tongue. The smoke behind them rose and curled into the clouds, where it dissolved into light, and the ocean stretched out again, endless and unsweetened, carrying them onward. The sea changed its color as they approached the isolated horizon of Wano. The waves grew heavier, the sky dimmer, as if the world itself bent around the hidden nation. The log pose quivered until the needles crossed, and through the mist emerged cliffs shaped like dragon spines, towering gates carved with forgotten symbols, and waterfalls that fell upward, dragging the sea into the clouds. There was no welcome here, only secrecy. Wano was a country locked inside its own legend, its people forbidden to see the outside world, its skies watched by beasts and gods. The Straw Hats looked upon it with awe, the final threshold before the dawn that Roger had once spoken of, the place where the world's circle would begin to close. The wind carried the scent of smoke and sakura, a perfume of beauty grown from sorrow, and when they finally breached the wall of storms that protected the land, it was as if they had stepped into another time entirely. The island breathed like a memory of the samurai age. Villages of wooden eaves nestled between mountains. The people bowed under the weight of decades of tyranny. Kaido's shadow covered it all, vast and suffocating, the form of a dragon that circled the heavens like the embodiment of despair. He had ruled for 20 years, a beast that could not die, drunk on power and boredom, keeping the people in chains not out of malice but to prove that even the strongest dream can be broken. Orochi, the puppet shogun, danced below him, his laughter brittle, his cruelty petty, a man terrified of the past. And beneath the soil, beneath the ruins of Kazuki Odin's castle, the fire of rebellion had waited, whispering through generations, preserved in the names of those who refused to forget. The crew scattered as always, Robin and Nami, disguised among courtiers, Frankie hammering as a carpenter, Usopp selling laughter as medicine, and Zoro wandering like a ghost of the old world, his swords drawn to the country's sorrow as if the steel itself could smell injustice. Luffy, as ever, dove into the storm head first, his presence a spark that reignited hope in those who had buried it. In the hidden villages, the people whispered his name alongside Odin's, seeing in him the same impossible brightness, the same refusal to bow. The samurai gathered again, faces weathered by decades of hiding, eyes lit with belief. For the first time in 20 years, the drums of rebellion beat beneath the cherry blossoms. Wano was a tapestry of stories, each thread knotted by loss. Odin, the lord who had danced naked through the streets to save his people, whose death in boiling oil had become myth, whose smile even in flames had become prophecy. Toki, his wife, a woman who had leapt across centuries to bring hope to a future she would never see. Their children, Momonosuke and Hiyori, scattered by time and fate, carrying fragments of dawn in their veins. And across the sea, the echoes of their sacrifice had reached the world that forgot them, stirring those who had once sailed with Roger, those who knew that Wano was not merely a country but a key, a chapter in the world's erased history. The poneglyphs that Robin sought, the whispers of the void century, all converged here, beneath a sky heavy with dragons. The battles that followed were storms made flesh. Samurai clashed with beasts, laughter rose through fire, and in every blow Luffy grew closer to the shape destiny demanded of him. He faced Kaido again and again, falling and rising, each defeat carving humility into strength, each scar reminding him that even rubber can be stretched too far before it snaps. Yet he kept laughing, even as thunder cracked and blades broke, even as the dragon's roar drowned out the wind. Because, for him, the fight was not about victory, it was about liberation. When the drums of his heart began to echo like something ancient, when his laughter took on the rhythm of the sun itself, the world trembled. The fruit he carried, the one thought to be mere rubber, awakened into something older, something playful and divine. The people called it Nika, the sun god of freedom, the embodiment of joy that had been suppressed by centuries of fear. In that form, he danced against Kaido's might, his movements like dreams given weight, his laughter breaking through the clouds. The dragon fell, not to power, but to joy itself, to the truth that no tyranny can survive in the face of a heart that refuses to stop laughing. The fire that consumed Onigashima illuminated the dawn, the first sunrise Wano had seen in decades that was not clouded by smoke. The bells rang, the sakura petals fell, and the people wept as if time had been restored. Momonosuke rose as shogun, his father's name on his lips, his heart trembling with the weight of peace. The samurai bowed, the pirates smiled, and the sun broke through the last veil of night. As they prepared to leave, Robin traced her fingers along the ancient stone hidden deep within the land, its symbols whispering of Laugh-Tale, of the true history waiting at the world's end. Luffy listened only for the sound of adventure in the wind. He stood at the prow of the Sunny once more, hat tilted back, eyes gleaming. His crew gathered behind him, their laughter rolling across the waves like a promise renewed. The world government trembled, the revolutionaries moved, the navy hesitated. Somewhere far away, a new generation of pirates raised their sails, chasing the same dream. The era of dawn had begun, not because tyranny had ended, but because one boy's laughter had reminded the world how to breathe again. The sun shone brighter that morning, the horizon widened, the sea stretched beyond imagination, and the sound that carried furthest of all was Luffy's. Laughter endless, fearless, free. The world after Wano felt lighter and heavier all at once, as though a veil had been lifted and a weight immediately replaced it. News spread faster than ships could sail of Kaido's fall, of the new alliances, of a pirate's laughter that rang louder than any cannon, and in the corners of every sea, people began to whisper again of the One Piece, the treasure that once belonged to the man who started it all. Luffy's name, now spoken with awe and fear in equal measure, rolled across taverns and battlefields alike. The boy who had once chased clouds through East Blue had become a symbol not just of defiance, but of something greater possibility itself. The world government tightened its grip, the revolutionaries stirred from shadow, the navy rebalanced its pieces, and yet through it all, the sea itself seemed to laugh, as if pleased that someone had reminded it of what it was meant to be, a place where no law could reach. The Thousand Sunny sailed onward, her lion's face gleaming in the new light. The crew carried themselves differently now, each of them tempered by loss and victory, their dreams no longer naive, but luminous and deliberate. Nami charted with calm precision, the lines on her maps flowing like veins of the world itself. Zoro's blades gleamed sharper, the air around him thick with quiet conviction. Sanji hummed at the stove, the smell of his food filling the air with home. Robin read softly beneath the sun, the pages whispering secrets only she could understand. Frankie's laughter boomed from the deck, iron and joy intertwined. Brooke's violin threaded through the wind, its melody both mournful and proud. Jinbei's eyes watched the waves, as though reading prophecy in their motion, and Luffy, sitting on the figurehead, grinned at nothing and everything, his hat tilted just enough to let the sunlight touch his face. They had seen the sky, the depths, the underworld, and the heavens of men, yet still the sea stretched onward, infinite and inviting. Each island they approached seemed to hum with significance, every encounter part of a larger song they were only beginning to understand. The will of D, that mysterious mark that tied generations of dreamers together, whispered in the air around them. Robin would speak of it at night, her voice low and patient, telling them that it was not merely a name, but a heartbeat shared through time, a rhythm of those who stood against stagnation. The D's were the world's reminder that freedom cannot be erased, that laughter returns no matter how many times it is silenced. Luffy never cared for theories, but when she spoke, he would smile quietly, as if he already knew, as if the truth of that name had always been singing in his chest. The grand line narrowed now, the map nearing its end, yet the horizon felt broader than ever. They met allies old and new, Kid with his defiant grin, Law with his steady eyes, the remnants of Whitebeard's family, the revolutionaries whose fire had begun to rise. The world stood on the edge of change, a balance so delicate that even a whisper could tilt it, and in the center of it all sailed a single ship of dreamers, carrying nothing but laughter and belief. Their journey had become something sacred not because of destiny, but because they had chosen it every day, against every storm. At night, the stars seemed closer than before, as though the sky itself bent down to listen. Brook played softly, and his music carried memories, the voice of Laboon calling from the first half of the Grand Line, the sound of friends left behind, the echo of promises kept. Sometimes, when the moonlight hit the sea just right, the surface shimmered with reflections that looked like faces, Ace smiling, Mary's spirit watching, Vivi waving from her desert kingdom, Odin's laughter blending with Roger's. It was as if the ocean had become a memory made visible, every ripple another life touched by. Their voyage. There were still enemies waiting, storms uncounted, truths untold, but none of that mattered in the quiet moments between waves. For Luffy, The treasure had already begun to reveal itself, not as gold or crowns, but as the people beside him, the world they had glimpsed, the freedom of waking each morning to another horizon. The one piece might still lie hidden at the world's end, but the meaning of it, the heartbeat of it, was already alive on their deck. He would find it because he must, but when he did, he would laugh not because he had won, but because the sea had kept its promise. And somewhere far away, beyond the calm belt, beyond the reach of even the most daring sails, the island of Laugh-Tale waited, its shores bathed in eternal light, its stones carved with the true history of everything, its silence filled with the laughter of those who had arrived before. Roger had once stood there and laughed, not out of triumph, but recognition. And someday soon, another laugh would join his, the same sound, reborn through another heart. When that day comes, the sea will tremble again, not in fear, but in joy, and the world will remember what it means to be alive. The wind shifted, the stars turned, the Sunny rode the current with grace, her sails full of dreams. The crew, half asleep, half awake, drifted into that space between story and eternity. The waves whispered around them, carrying their laughter outward, scattering it to every shore, every lonely soul staring at the horizon. And the ocean answered in kind, its endless voice rising and falling with their rhythm, as if to say, the journey never ends, it only changes form. So they sailed onward, into the dawn, into legend, into forever, each heartbeat another wave, each smile another light, each dream another piece of the one treasure the world had always been searching for, the freedom to simply live, to laugh, to love the sea and all who sail upon it. The dawn was soft the next morning. A quiet gold spread across the sky like a gentle hand, smoothing away the night, and for a long moment the ship didn't move at all, just floated as though the ocean itself was resting. The air was warm, the kind of warmth that feels like memory, and the sails hung half full, drifting lazily in a current that seemed to go nowhere and everywhere at once. Luffy sat cross-legged on the figurehead, hat pulled low, watching the line where sky met sea. It shimmered the way laughter does when it's about to become real, the way every beginning hides inside an ending. Behind him, the others woke slowly, the world coming back in pieces, the clink of a cup, the rustle of maps, the faint hum of brook strings, a rhythm that sounded less like music and more like breathing. The sea looked endless but familiar, like a page waiting to be written on by hands that already know the story. They had sailed so far that even the maps could no longer keep up, the islands now appearing without warning, each one stitched to the next by chance and courage. Sometimes they stopped and helped where they could, a village rebuilding after pirates, a child dreaming of the sea, an old man who swore he'd once met Gold Roger himself. Their names didn't matter. It was the laughter that stayed, floating behind them long after the island disappeared. Nami would chart those places anyway, not for navigation but remembrance, small points of light on a map that was really a diary of kindness. Every night the stars seemed closer. Robin said it was because they were nearing the end of the Grand Line, but Frankie laughed and said maybe the stars were just leaning down to listen. Sometimes Jinbei told stories of the ocean's deepest trenches, of cities built in silence, of whales older than kingdoms. Zoro would sit sharpening his blades beside him, nodding, saying nothing, but every now and then his eyes would flick toward the horizon like he could already see the next fight waiting. Sanji smoked near, the rail, the glow of his cigarette, a tiny lighthouse in the dark, thinking about the friends they'd left behind, about the women who'd smiled at him once, and then he'd exhale and grin again, because the sea never lets a man stay sad for long. Luffy listened to them all, sometimes understanding, sometimes not, but always smiling. He didn't need to explain his dream anymore. They all carried it now. He looked at his crew and saw the treasure he'd been chasing, and even though he still wanted the one piece, the laughter at the end of the world, he knew that whatever waited there would only be another way of saying what he already felt, that freedom is not a prize, but a heartbeat shared among friends who refused to stop moving. The sea would test them again, new storms, new enemies, new truths, but none of it frightened him. Somewhere beyond the clouds the last island waited, and when they reached it, the world would laugh again. The wind picked up just enough to fill the sails. Brooke's bow touched the strings, and the first notes rose like birds. The Sunny leaned forward, her hull humming, the water parting with a sigh, and the ship began to move, slow at first, then faster, the horizon opening like a door. In that motion was everything they had ever been: the boy who set out from a tiny village, the swordsman who had never lost his way, the navigator who found light in storms, the cook who believed kindness could feed the world, the scholar who carried history in her hands, the shipwright who built miracles from wreckage, the skeleton who sang to the dead and the living alike, the helmsman who guided them through night and tide. Together they were the sound of tomorrow, a melody the sea never tires of hearing. The clouds ahead turned pink, the sky widening, the air trembling with the promise of another day. Luffy stood, stretched, and laughed, just a simple, ordinary laugh that reached farther than any prophecy ever could. And in that sound was the whole story, the endless sea, the unbroken dream, the truth that no matter how far they sailed, there would always be another horizon calling their names. The ship cut through the light, the wake behind it glowing like a path back through every place they'd been, every soul they'd met, every piece of the world they'd helped mend. Somewhere ahead, maybe just beyond the next sunrise, an island waited where all stories ended and began again. But for now there was only this: the wind in their faces, the warmth of the sun, the laughter that never stopped. The sea whispered back to them in waves, saying, softly and forever, keep going. And so, as the sun lowered itself into the edge of the world and the sea turned from gold to indigo, the story came to rest, not ended, not concluded, but exhaled, like the ocean after a storm. The waves moved in time with the breathing of the crew, slow and certain, carrying them forward, though there was nowhere left to go for now. The Thousand Sunny glowed faintly under the stars, her lanterns painting soft halos across the water, the reflections trembling like laughter. Remembered. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was full, not empty, filled with every word they had ever said and every promise they had ever kept. The wind was warm, the kind of warmth that feels like an embrace. Zoro's swords rested quietly at his side. Sanji's flame burned low and steady. Nami's maps lay folded like secret prayers. Robin sat beneath the mast with a book she wasn't reading, her eyes turned to the horizon as though she could see all the centuries yet to come. Frankie leaned back against the rail, one hand on the wood he had built, proud and protective. Brooke played a slow tune, his bow moving as gently as the tide, the notes drifting into the night until they became indistinguishable from the sound of the waves. Jinbei stood at the helm, guiding them not toward a destination but into the comfort of motion itself. Luffy sat where he always did, hat tipped forward, grin soft and wide, the sea reflected in his eyes. The laughter that had carried him from one end of the world to the other lingered quietly in his chest, no longer loud but steady, the kind of joy that doesn't need to be shouted to be true. He thought of the friends they had found and lost, the islands that had taught them, the enemies who had turned into lessons, the dreams that had changed shape but never meaning. He thought of the ocean, of the way it had held him when the world broke, of how it always forgave, always invited him back. Somewhere out there, the last island still waited, but he wasn't in a hurry anymore. He knew now that the journey had never been about reaching it, it was about everything that happened on the way. The night deepened. The stars bent low over the sea like curious watchers, and for a moment the ship seemed to drift, not through water, but through the sky itself, its reflection indistinguishable from the heavens. Brooke's final note faded. The wind fell quiet. The crew slept, one by one, until only the ocean was awake, murmuring to itself, rocking them as gently as memory. And if you listen closely, somewhere between the whisper of the waves and the pulse of your own heartbeat, you can still hear them, the sound of laughter, distant but familiar, echoing across endless water, reminding you that the sea is wide and dreams are endless, and that somewhere, far beyond the horizon, a boy with a straw hat is still sailing, still smiling, still chasing the dawn. Good night, traveler of the waves. Sleep well beneath the stars. The ocean keeps your dreams safe until morning.